An aircraft carrier serves as the centerpiece of the U.S. Navy's fleet. It's designed to accommodate up to 6,000 sailors and is equipped with luxurious facilities. But when war strikes, the unthinkable happens. Can you imagine living on a ship surrounded by thousands of people while being in the middle of a war? That's exactly what it's like for sailors on an aircraft carrier. These massive ships are like floating airports, complete with fighter jets, helicopters, and all the supplies that are necessary to run a small city. But what exactly happens when these ships go to war? We'll take you through the nerve-wracking experience of sailors dashing to their battle stations, numerous fighter jets launching into the sky, and the ship's complex weapon systems engaging enemy threats. Disclaimer, things get pretty intense out there, so hang tight. Before we look at how a ship prepares to go into a major war, it's good to understand the insane living conditions on board. So let's talk about life on board. To put it into perspective, an aircraft carrier is essentially a small city that's afloat in the middle of the ocean. Remember that up to 6,000 sailors on board don't get to see land for several months to a year or more. This means that the ship must be stocked with sufficient supplies, including food, water, and ammunition to sustain the crew during an extended deployment. Make no mistake, an aircraft carrier out in the ocean is under constant threat, but despite the challenging conditions, the ship does boast numerous facilities to help keep morale high. The sailors have access to a variety of amenities, including gyms, movie theaters, and even a Starbucks. These facilities are critical in helping the sailors relax and recharge during their downtime. However, it's to be noted that the living conditions on board can vary depending on the sailor's rank and duties. For instance, the junior enlisted sailors typically live in crowded berthing spaces and share communal bathrooms. Meanwhile, the higher-ranked officers often have more spacious staterooms and access to private bathrooms. Regardless, it's important to highlight that the ship's crew is like a large family, with sailors from all walks of life coming together to serve their country and support one another through the ups and downs of life at sea. The sailors form tight-knit bonds with their fellow crew members, which can last a lifetime. Another significant detail is that a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with sailors working in shifts to keep the ship running smoothly. The work is demanding and often physically and mentally challenging, with sailors performing a wide range of tasks to keep the ship and its aircraft operating at peak efficiency. It comes as no surprise that even a minor instance of carelessness while on board could be the difference between life and death, especially when war could strike at any given moment. This begs the question, how well is an aircraft carrier prepared for war? Preparing for war. Well prepared would be an understatement when describing an aircraft carrier's readiness for a big war. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is specially designed and built to be a self-contained mobile platform that can not only withstand an attack, but also retaliate with sheer force. But before it even gets to that point, a ton of preparations are made in advance, which allows the ship, along with its occupants, to tackle any threats out in the ocean. Every U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is pre-equipped with the latest cutting-edge technology. This includes a web of radar, communication, navigation, and weapon systems. These systems are coupled with a range of military aircraft housed on the flight deck. Let's start by looking into the radar systems on board these ships. The U.S. Navy uses several different types of radar, each with its own unique capabilities. One of the most important types is known as the N-Spy-1 radar system, which is strategically utilized to detect and track incoming missiles. As you can imagine, this is not only a crucial defense mechanism, but also a powerful tool to track hundreds of targets simultaneously. Don't forget that a single missile strike from an enemy force could be detrimental not only to the ship, but also to the sailors on board. And nothing is more important than the sailor's safety, So it's obvious that the US Navy goes the extra mile to assure that. But unfortunately, missiles are not the only airborne threats faced by these ships. Enemy forces often deploy aircraft to aid their attacks. Naturally, the US Navy has put into place another important radar system known as the AN-SPS-48. This is used for long-range air surveillance and can detect aircraft at ranges of up to 250 miles, giving the carrier's air wing plenty of time to fire up their aircraft and intercept the potential threats. Now let's not forget that we're out in the ocean though, so there's certainly a big threat from other ships also. Luckily, the US Navy is well prepared with an AN-SPS-49, which is used for surface search and navigation. In simpler terms, it can detect ships and other surface objects in the sea as far as 200 miles, making it yet another essential tool for acknowledging potential threats and also avoiding collisions or congested waters. Moving on, let's take a closer look at the weapon systems employed on US Navy aircraft carriers. It comes as no surprise that these gigantic ships pack a hefty punch. They're loaded with a variety of advanced weaponry, including missiles, guns, and torpedoes. One of the most important weapon systems on a carrier is the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, otherwise known as the CIWS. This is a rapid-fire gun system that's engineered to effectively shoot down incoming missiles and aircraft at close range. As unbelievable as it sounds, the CIWS is capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute, and it serves as a critical line of defense for the carrier against threats that have made it relatively close. Another key weapon system on these ships is the Tomahawk cruise missile. Many of you must have heard about the Tomahawk, but not many of you are aware of how powerful this weapon system really is. This long-range missile is capable of striking targets up to 1,500 miles away, making it one of the most significant and powerful tools for projecting American military power worldwide. It's worth noting that the Tomahawk can be launched from a variety of different platforms, including surface ships and submarines, but it's particularly effective when launched from an aircraft carrier. Since we're already discussing the topic of weaponry, let's talk about one of the US Navy's crucial prized possessions, military aircraft. US Navy carriers are typically home to a variety of fixed-wing aircraft, including fighter jets, attack planes, and surveillance aircraft. One of the most iconic aircraft flown from these ships is the FA-18 Hornet. This twin-engine powerhouse of a fighter jet is capable of flying at supersonic speeds and can carry a wide range of weapons, including air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground missiles, and bombs as well. The FA-18 Hornet is used for everything from air superiority missions to ground attack missions, giving it the nickname of Rhino, which comes from its commendable resilience. Another key aircraft flown from US Navy aircraft carriers is the E-2 Hawkeye, an airborne early warning and control aircraft that is often used as a prerequisite measure to detect and track potential threats such as incoming enemy aircraft. A Hawkeye is equipped with a powerful radar system that can literally scan the entire sky for hundreds of miles around the aircraft carrier, essentially allowing for an early warning in case a threat is on its way. Considering all these sophisticated systems, the need for superior communication becomes quite obvious, as without communications and coordination, every system is bound to fail. One could imagine how hectic the communication systems during a warlike scenario would be, but let's see how the US Navy sailors handle them. These systems are just as important as the weapons and aircraft on board, so it's no wonder that the technologies used for communication are incredibly advanced. From satellite communications to secure radio systems, the US Navy aircraft carrier has it all. One of the most important systems utilized is the Integrated Voice Communication Systems, also known as the IVCS. This technology allows sailors on the ship to communicate with each other through a bunch of different mediums, including phones, radios, and intercoms. Fun fact, there are more than 3,000 telephones on board a US Navy aircraft carrier. How crazy is that? Anyway, coming back to the IVCS. This system is essential for ensuring that the sailors on board can communicate quickly and efficiently, even in the heat of battle. Another key communication system is the ship's satellite technology. It allows the crewmen on board to stay in touch with other ships in the battle group, as well as with command centers back on shore. This satellite communication system is also used to transmit data, such as intelligence reports and important weather information. These factors play a very big role while out in the ocean. Now let's talk about crew training and roles. Now that we've discussed how well equipped a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is, let's not forget about all the men and women that run this ginormous ship. Of course, all of them must be well trained and briefed as to how all the systems on board must be handled, right? Without the thousands of crewmates on board, an aircraft carrier wouldn't make it far into the ocean. So the training of these brave sailors is a complex and multifaceted process that requires a significant investment of time and resources. Every sailor on board a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier has gone through a meticulous series of training before being deployed for a mission. This training is specifically known as pre-deployment training, and it comprises lessons to prepare every sailor for the potential combat scenarios. It usually lasts several months and covers a wide range of topics in order to make sure every sailor is not only well trained, but also capable of handling high-stress situations while in the middle of the ocean. Classroom instruction is typically conducted in a variety of settings, including the ship's classrooms, simulators, and training facilities on shore. Initially, crew members receive instruction in shipboard safety procedures, including how to handle emergency situations and how to use safety equipment such as firefighting gear and life rafts. These lessons are of big importance since it wouldn't take much for these scenarios to come into play in real-life situations while on board an aircraft carrier. During such emergency scenarios, every second counts, and one wrong move could cause major problems. Moving on. Crew members who work in the ship's navigation department receive instructions on how to navigate the ship and learn the technicalities of operating the onboard radar systems. They dive deep into the procedures of plotting courses while taking into consideration the weather and water conditions. Similarly, there are crew members who work in the engineering department who goes through a rigorous course that equips them with all the knowledge and skills necessary in operation of the ship's propulsion, electrical, and HVAC systems, as well as the maintenance and repair side of things. Most importantly, though, crew members are briefed about the ins and outs of the weapon system, including the aviation operations. Every crew member on board a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier has been trained to use the ship's weapon system along with launching and recovering aircraft. This also includes handling and storing aviation fuel and ordnance, and coordinating with the ship's air wing during combat operations. Finally, all sailors on board are taught the basic medical procedures, including first aid and emergency first aid. They're also trained to handle mass casualty situations that may occur while out on a mission. All of these lessons are conducted through a mix of lectures, demonstrations, and hands-on training. Hands-on training specifically is actually a very critical component of the overall training procedure for the sailors, as it takes them in practical situations to apply their knowledge and skills. The crew members are basically made familiar with the ship's physical systems and equipment through a series of lessons. However, the methods used to deliver these lessons can vary, but generally involve a combination of supervised practice and assessments. In some cases, crew members may work in teams to complete certain activities on the ship, ultimately helping them to develop their teamwork and communication skills, both of which are very important for actual emergencies while out on the ocean. At the end of it, crew members are evaluated and tested on their knowledge and skill acquired throughout the training sessions. This evaluation can take the form of written tests, practical assessments, and even simulations on an aircraft carrier. All crew members are expected to demonstrate a mastery of the material before being deemed suitable to be deployed on actual missions on board a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live on an aircraft carrier during wartime? Would you be able to sleep? Let us know in the comments below. Let's move on to initial response to battle. By now, we understand how well prepared and appropriately equipped a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is, along with the 6,000 crew members on board. Let's imagine that an aircraft carrier is sailing through the ocean on a textbook day. Nothing appears to be unordinary. Suddenly, one of the radars detects enemy forces approaching the ship. What happens next? How is everyone alerted, and how does the crew get into position to face an emergency of this nature? Well, when war strikes an aircraft carrier, it's like nothing else in the world. The ship becomes a hive of activity, with sailors rushing to their battle stations and preparing for the worst. The adrenaline is pumping and the tension is high as the ship prepares to engage in combat. Unsurprisingly, the flight deck is a flurry of activity by this point. Pilots are scrambling to suit up and prepare to launch into the sky by conducting preliminary flight tests to make sure all weapon systems on the aircraft are operational. Amidst this, the air traffic control tower also springs into action, briefing the crew members and coordinating the takeoff and landing of aircraft. As the aircraft eventually take off with engines roaring, usually minutes after initiating an increased operational status, the ship's defensive weapon systems also come online, actively scanning the horizon for incoming missiles or enemy aircraft. The trained sailors manning these sophisticated systems are also on high alert and are ready to engage any threats that may come their way at any moment. Meanwhile, the medical team on board the aircraft carrier is preparing for any potential casualties, while the engineering team is ensuring that all systems on the ship are functioning properly and ready for battle. This includes conducting regular checks on equipment, performing maintenance and repairs, and ensuring that the ship's weapon systems are fully operational. The ship's commanders are also in constant communication with other military forces in the area, coordinating their efforts and ensuring that the ship is part of a larger, coordinated response. This is important since the level of threat from enemy forces is usually very uncertain, especially in the initial response. Therefore, the commanders prepare for the worst regardless of how big or small a threat may appear at first glance. Within just a few minutes, the aircraft carrier has now launched several aircraft into the sky and prepared the weapon systems to engage in combat as soon as a threat is sighted. Every sailor on board is appropriately stationed. Some are manning the missiles and torpedoes, while some are keeping a close eye on the radar systems. The ship has essentially gone from a neutral state to a state of high alert and readiness to engage in combat. At this point, the crew is focused and ready for literally anything. They have trained for these scenarios extensively, and everyone is aware of their roles and responsibilities. As aircraft continue to patrol the skies and the ship's weapon systems remain active, the tension on board remains high. Every sailor knows that they are in a potentially dangerous situation, and they are prepared to do whatever it takes to protect the ship and their fellow crew members. Despite the heightened state of alert, the crew remains disciplined and professional since they know very well that any mistake could have serious consequences, and they are committed to performing their duties to the best of their abilities. A combat situation. Now's an appropriate time to discuss combat situations where the ship is actively engaged with enemy threats. It should come as no surprise that combat on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is a highly complex and coordinated effort, requiring the sailors on board to work together seamlessly to protect the ship and its personnel while also carrying out offensive operations against enemy targets. When it comes to defensive operations, one of the preliminary responsibilities of the crew during combat is air defense. This involves using the ship's weapon systems, including guns and missiles, to defend against incoming enemy threats. As expected, the crew also made good use of the radars and sensors that we talked about earlier in order to appropriately detect potential threats. Remember the detector that picks up on submarine sounds? Well, that helps with another key element of combat known as anti-submarine warfare. The sailors work together to detect and track enemy submarines using sonar systems and then engage them with weapon systems such as torpedoes. In addition to these defensive operations focused on keeping the ship safe, the crew of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is also responsible for carrying out a number of offensive operations against enemy targets. This may involve launching aircraft to carry out bombing runs, missile strikes, or other types of attacks against enemy at sea or even on land. It's worth noting that the crew members work closely with the ship's air wing to plan and coordinate such attacks in order to ensure that they are carried out effectively and in accordance with mission objectives. During these situations, since everyone on board is prepared for the worst-case scenario, which could include being hit by enemy fire, the ship's damage control teams are promptly called into action. These teams are responsible for responding quickly and effectively to damage that may occur on board the ship, ensuring that the ship remains operational and able to carry out its mission objectives even while under attack. The damage control team members are usually subdivided into repair locker teams, firefighting teams, flooding teams, and chemical, biological, and radiological defense teams, also known as the CBR team. It's to be noted that when an aircraft carrier is deployed for an extended period, logistics become critical. The ship must be stocked with sufficient supplies, including food, water, and ammunition, to sustain the crew during the deployment. This requires careful planning and coordination to ensure that the ship has everything it needs to fulfill its mission. As one may expect, the logistics involved in supporting an aircraft carrier are massive. A carrier usually produces more than 400,000 gallons of fresh water per day thanks to the desalination systems on board. Moreover, the ship's supply chain is carefully monitored to ensure that it has everything it needs to sustain its operations. As a result of this, aircraft carriers can remain engaged in combat for a substantial amount of time before being exhausted of their resources, an event that's very unlikely to occur. Post-combat procedures. At this point, you must be wondering what happens when the combat situation ends. Well, it's certainly not as simple as returning back to normal operations. When combat stops, the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier and its crew will typically transition from a state of high alert and readiness back to a more routine operational status, but this involves a number of procedures depending on the preceding situation and the level of threat endured. Usually when the preceding situation was not too serious, the ship's commanding officer will issue what's known as a stand-down order. This signals the crew on board that the immediate threat has passed and that they can simply return to their regular duties. However, if the ship was involved in combat, the crew will typically conduct an evaluation of any damage sustained during the engagement. This can involve inspecting the ship's hull, weapon systems, and other critical components to ensure that everything is still functioning properly. It's important to do this because, as stated earlier, nobody on the ship knows when the next threat may come their way, so readiness is a top priority, even after the threat has just been dismissed. Nevertheless, it's not uncommon for a ship to sustain damage, so the engineering team will likely begin conducting repairs and maintenance if that's the case. This can involve replacing damaged components and conducting appropriate tests to ensure that everything is back in working order. In worse situations where casualties or injuries were sustained during the engagement, the ship's medical team will continue to provide care and treatment as necessary. They may also conduct a more thorough assessment of any injured or sick crew member to ensure that they receive appropriate care. Soon enough, once all these procedures are completed, normal operations can continue, such as resuming patrol duty, conducting training exercises, or engaging in other routine activities. Now that we're aware of what exactly goes down on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier when it's out in war, let's go back in history to one of the most significant wars fought by the U.S. Navy, the Gulf War, also known as Operation Desert Shield or Desert Storm. During this conflict, the U.S. Navy deployed multiple aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf to support the coalition forces. These gigantic aircraft carriers played a critical role in the Gulf War, providing air support to the ground troops and conducting airstrikes against Iraqi targets. The U.S. Navy also used these carriers to enforce a naval blockade of Iraq, preventing supplies from reaching the Iraqi military. This is one of the many different instances throughout history where the U.S. Navy played a pioneering role during combat situations while out on the ocean. From bringing the ship to an increased operational status to preparing the crew and aircraft for combat, life on an aircraft carrier during wartime is anything but easy. But with the dedication, bravery, and hard work of the sailors on board, these massive ships are not only able to fulfill their mission, but also protect the country as a result. We'd love to know about your favorite historical moment of the U.S. Navy. Be sure to leave a comment below to let us know. If you find the impressive power and technology of these warships intriguing, remember to click the like and subscribe buttons to stay informed about the latest videos on the U.S. Navy. Your support is highly valued, and we look forward to your return. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon to receive notifications for our future videos. We'll catch you in the next one.